Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. California State Prison Sacramento is often referred to as New Folsom, which was its official name prior to October 1992. When it first opened in late 1986, Warden Robert Borg, who I had a good relationship with and whom most staff respected because he promoted up the ranks from a CO, oversaw both New and Old Folsom. Since the first day it opened, New Folsom has housed level 4 maximum security prisoners who were difficult to manage at other prisons and who had long sentences, were often lifers, meaning they might never get out, and many were gang members, associates, or formerly belonged to the Big Four. The housing blocks of A, B, and C facility at New Folsom held well over 100 inmates each, and there were 8 housing blocks in every facility, which brought the population of each facility up to around 1,000 inmates. Each was partitioned into 3 separate, self-contained sections, known as A, B, and C sections, with a cement wall in between each section that formed a 180 degrees half circle. This new 180 design of many prisons built from the 1980s on was considered to be the most secure design because it gave control booth officers a straight-on look at prisoners. Each control officer worked 3 separate panels with buttons to operate each section door in individual cells. They could also do a group unlock. They could talk to other officers discreetly via intercom or make loud speaker announcements in the units. They also carried radio communications on their duty belts, as well as a .38 revolver sidearm. They had quick access to a Mini 14 rifle for yard coverage and an HK 9mm rifle for in-unit use, where big signs were posted, "No warning shots," and we meant it. Officers on the ground also had radios inside handled batons when I worked there in the late 1980s to early 1990s. A lot of the day shift and some of the graveyard shift with seniority transferred in from Old Folsom, and occasionally some of the guards from Old Folsom would work overtime at New Folsom, but I recall a lot of them didn't like it, and using Star Wars terminology, called us the dark side. Most officers like myself on swing shift were straight out of the academy. One thing convicts will tell you is that they size you up right away, whether you are hard ass or soft, and they pass that word about your reputation around to other inmates. I think most would say that I was a fair officer and one that paid attention. Not all inmates came out to the yard every day. Some were all working the units or working in the Prison Industry Authority or other places. But on some nice days, there might be 700 to 800 inmates out on the big recreational yard. My very first prisoner escorts to New Folsom B Yard, Building 1, was Aryan Brotherhood General Wendell Blue Norris, along with his henchman, bodyguard and cellie, Art Ox Rufo. In Blue's property, we discovered a big bag of Pruno, or inmate-manufactured alcohol, and when we got there, another escorting officer popped the Pruno in his bag, which poured all over Norris's legal paperwork. The officer laughed loud about it, but I did not. I was now officially on Norris's official shit list. One day, months later, the Aryan Brotherhood threw a homemade bomb at me. The device was made out of a deodorant container stuffed with matches, metal snaps for shrapnel, and treated with twisted toilet paper that had been pissed on to make it burn better for a fuse. I escaped serious injury, but the loud echoing sound in the unit was a little intimidating. I doubt if it would have killed me, but it could have put my eyes out. And I always wondered if the bomb was due to the personal property incident with Blue. I never instigated inmates like a few guards did, but sometimes I got caught up in gang politics, even if I didn't want to. One day, Mexican Mafia member Danny Popeye Roman was working in B1 lockdown, and I caught him sneaking burritos in from the dining hall workers, which I knew he was selling out on the tiers. When I seized his food, he challenged me, "Do you know who the fuck I am?" Later on, I pulled his C-file and found out that he had recently committed a homicide out on the street. I expected unit staff to back me up on this encounter, but they just laughed about it and gave him back his food. Soon after my encounter with Roman, I was supervising dining hall workers between the same B1 unit and the adjoining B2 housing unit on Cinco de Mayo, 1987. The majority of the crew was Chicanos, and they loved this day because it meant that they got enchiladas as well as burritos, when usually they only got one of them, plus rice and beans for dinner. I inventoried the food that would be given to the housing units based on their population counts, but both units told me they were short of the one tray of enchiladas each. I did not know it at the time, but I guess a little food war had broken out between the staff and inmates. And because of my complaints and a few others, inmates were no longer being allowed to take food back to their units. Due to this action, inmates were putting extra food down the garbage disposal so that staff couldn't eat the leftovers either. I double checked again and could not find any extra trays of enchiladas, so there would have been none to give to them even if I had been mistaken. I informed the unit staff of this and they told me that I would be responsible if a riot broke out. So I called the B facility sergeant and reported what happened. He soon brought in a search crew of about 10 officers to look for the missing food, but these kitchen workers were slick. As soon as the staff searched one area and cleared it, the inmates moved their food into that cleared area. The search crew then left the unit, also satisfied that there was no extra food. As soon as they left, the dining room workers let out some gritos, some shouts, in celebration of outsmarting the gringo prison cops, and on Cinco de Mayo, no less. They were totally elated and pulled out their hidden food to have a big feast. I grabbed the 2 trays of enchiladas and headed to the unit doors with them, and advised staff on both ends that I now had enough food so they could feed their units. Of course, the inmates were furious at my action. One even told me that there might be even more food back in the walk-in fridge, and that I should come back there to check. The walk-in fridge was out of sight of the unit gunners, and would also be a good place to kill me. In fact, this was the very same kitchen that prison gang members plotted to hit and kill Seal Milo Laguna in, and I believe that he was the one that I was relieving on Cinco de Mayo for his day off. I declined their offer, and as a consolation prize told them I had called the main kitchen to get them sack lunches if they were still hungry. This was adding insult to injury as far as they were concerned. To make matters even worse, the unit staff got up in the unit gunner windows and started making pigs out of themselves as they devoured the enchiladas while laughing at the inmates who mad dogged me. Man, I tell you, it was like on that cartoon show, Help Me, Mr. Wizard. But somehow I survived that evening. Some nights were just like that. Not long after that day, in May 1987, inmate Roman was on the chair working when an inmate associated with the AB, Todd Ashker, yes, the same one that many years later started the end of hostilities agreement and led the hunger strikes, which virtually shut down the security housing units, stabbed an old AB named Dennis Irish Murphy on orders of Wendell Blue Norris. The housing unit gunner opened up the cell door for inmate Robert Tanner when he and Ashker are said to have run inside and stabbed Murphy to death. I was told that Roman also ran up and held up a mattress so the cell gunner couldn't see the victim being stabbed. There were no more volunteer unit workers allowed after that incident. Roman was later killed in June 2020 while he was at SADF. About a month later, in June of 1987, Blues enforcer Ox Rufo was shot in the hip by Officer David Pitts during a knife attack on a blood inmate MB1 yard out. The Rufo attack occurred about the same time that fellow AB Cornfed Schneider attacked another black inmate in what prison authorities defined as a hit attempt. These incidents kicked off Hell Week, a series of attacks ordered by Blue Norris in retaliation for the shooting of Art Rufo. Blue also had ordered Cornfed to stab CO Carl Kropp in the throat during a cell search. 1987 was a very active year for the AB at New Folsom, as neither Corcoran Shoe or Pelican Bay Shoe were open. Yet, there were some brown housed at Tehachapi Shoe, as I mentioned in the previous video. There were other ABs that I recall on B Yard at the time. For instance, Spanky Smythe had recently returned from the feds and was considered to be a spokesman for them. First time I ever heard of future AB General Ronnie Renegade Yandell was around this time. He later went to the feds and was close to Federal Aryan Brotherhood General Barry Mills. Jasper Odinson Crowell, who has been seen in some documentaries, was housed at B facility as well. He was subject to several cell extractions and was very defiant. He had shamrocks in his eyes, and in spite of some claiming otherwise, he was a made member, or would have not have had a shamrock on his neck. He was a true dedicated soldier for the AB, but eventually became disillusioned with them, dropped out, and later went on to live a better life than under the rock. March of 1990, Schneider stabbed attorney Philip Cousins 4 times as the two engaged in a conversation at the Sacramento courthouse during fellow AB member Todd Ashker's trial for the murder of Irish Murphy at New Folsom a few years earlier. Cornfed allegedly pled guilty to stabbing Cousins after getting a plea bargain of 2 pizzas and a liter of Pepsi. In the early 1990s, former AB General Blue Norris debriefed at Pelican Bay. I escorted him again, this time to the New Folsom Violence Control Unit in 1992. I recall this very clearly because when he walked in, he yelled out, "CDC did me wrong, brothers." Now, usually when inmates enter to that particular unit, there was a huge round of applause, shout outs, and kicking of doors and celebration. This time, there was none of that. You could have heard a pin drop. Old Blue was done and considered no good. He died in 2003. Reported self-inflicted stab wounds to his chest, just over his heart in a CDC gym. I was a very enthusiastic new officer, joining the officer recruitment team and took many courses, like investigative employee. In this capacity, I would help sergeants and lieutenants gather more information for disciplinary hearings. A lot of times, this information included missing links to incidents. Often supervisors would ask me if I wanted to sit in on these hearings. I remember one time there was an inmate who had gas staff, meaning that he had thrown urine and feces mixed in a cup at an officer. This inmate was a lifer, and there really was not much they could do to him. The school lieutenant and sergeant were present when they called the inmate into the unit counselor's office and asked me to hold up a mattress in front of the door. I had no idea what this hearing was all about at first. I figured the guy must have damaged a mattress and they wanted to confront him with the evidence. But there was nothing wrong with the mattress. After I put it up, they proceeded to beat this guy down. No head shots, but many shots in the gut. Then they asked him if he wanted to appeal his decision, and he shook his head vigorously no. Then they released him back to his cell. I couldn't believe what I just saw. Another day while I was working in the dining hall, either 1987 or 1988, who was known as a Crip and had a blue sweatshirt he was wearing underneath his inmate issued shirt. Now, in the old days, guards wouldn't sweat something like this. You could see inmates wearing colors all the time in old photos. But this was New Folsom and not allowed. When the inmate was finished eating, I isolated him from a group of 8 returning back to their cells and ordered him to hand over the shirt. He was extremely upset about it and cussed me out for messing with him and acted like he might assault me. So I documented all this on a CDC 115 rule violation. A few days later, after a hearing with the lieutenant in the C facility program office, the inmate was escorted back to C1 unit and evidently had words with one of the guards. I learned later that both were at San Quentin when Sergeant Hal Birchford was killed by the Crips on orders of the BGF. And evidently this inmate was somehow believed to be involved or present when it all went down. The inmate was really pissed about all the recent heat by us prison cops, so when he re-entered the unit, he took this escort officer hostage. Supposedly the inmate was a martial artist, and he acted like it. He used a quick move and grabbed the CO around the neck with one arm and held the officer's arm back with his other hand, using the officer as a human shield from the housing control gunner so that he would not be shot. The officer was getting choked out. I could see that when the officer was getting choked out, his face went from red to turning blue. And I remember there was a lot of yelling. I ordered him to let the officer go, but he just tightened up his grip. Now, we were taught at the academy to avoid the head at all times when using our batons. I tried hitting the inmate in the legs, but I was also striking the officer and looked at me with a "what the fuck are you doing" gaze. Finally, I came down with a forceful karate chop motion with my baton on the inmate's shoulder blade, but also grazed his head. Timber! His body seemed to be in slow motion, then fell to the floor, hitting the corner of the section door rail. Blood was gushing out of his head, more from the hit on the door than from my baton. He was out cold for a second. Oh my God, I thought, did I just kill this guy? After he hit the ground, the officer that he took hostage put a quick ass whooping to him after he came to again, before we pulled the officer off. A medical call was called, and they rushed him out on a gurney. I was told that he was in a coma at UC Davis Medical Center and might not live. I was thinking, damn, this sucks. Maybe I'm going to go up on murder charges now, lose my job, and go to prison. But it just so happened that he lived, and I was soon cleared of any wrongdoing in a use of force review. One of our inmate workers, also called trustees or porters, a black youngster named Little Pete, was very upset about this incident and confronted me one day shortly after, stating, "You beat that man, Morales. How could you do that?" Actually, I only hit him twice with baton strikes. I didn't reply back to clarify what really happened, but I recall another unit worker, former AB, tell Little Pete, "Relax, man. Save your anger for somebody who really deserves it." And the trustee calmed down a little. The subject involved was a well-known informant that told on a lot of people and got a lot of people in trouble. A few years later, I saw an inmate walking on crutches, making a beeline for me across the main yard. It was common for inmates to come up and ask me questions about all kinds of stuff, but I would always look around to make sure that it was not a decoy, and I always kept my answers short, not to be distracted for too long. As he came closer, I squinted my eyes to try to identify him, and I remember thinking he looked kind of familiar, but I was not sure. But when he was about 10 feet away, it finally clicked, and I recognized him. It was the same inmate that I had the encounter with my baton. I was thinking, oh great, this guy is going to shank me now and has been waiting for this moment. It's hard to explain, but I got tunnel vision, and for some reason, I could not move. I was totally freaked out. The time span from when I finally knew who he was until when he was about a foot away from my face was microseconds. Then the inmate put his hand out, and I snapped out of it, getting ready to block his knife thrust. But he just extended his hand for a shake. I shook it very briefly, being very puzzled. He explained to me that after the CO assault, he got a security housing unit shoe program at Corcoran, and while in isolation, he got in a fight with his cellie and did not stop. The patrol gunner shot him, and he later lost his leg to amputation. He told me that he was now a reborn Christian and that I would have no problems from him. I blew a huge sigh of relief inside my body and told him that I appreciated his apology, but that was a hell of a way to learn a lesson, and he agreed. It said that corrections is 90% boredom and 10% sheer terror, and I certainly believe that. On another occasion, a BGF prison general named Paul Jones cussed me out and rushed me on the tier after he felt he was issued dirty laundry. The control officer was supposed to cover me in case I was assaulted while I was out there on the tier, but to my dismay, he let Jones out of his cell. Then the officer ran off into the bathroom and left me out there with no gun coverage. I could not believe what I saw and heard. Jones came closer, just inches away from my face, telling me, please, oh please, put your hands on me, and I will knock your ass out. I'm pretty sure I was sweating bullets, not knowing what else to do. Jones's arms were bigger than my leg muscles, and I saw visions of him picking me up with one hand and throwing me over the tier, like George Jackson had done to an officer at Soledad back in 1970, killing him. Now, I think I'm pretty brave, but I'm not dumb. I surrendered my position and dropped the stack of linen on the ground and said, here, you can have all the sheets you want, which he did. Being very shook up, I soon went down to the program office and told Sergeant Val Rendon what had just occurred, and he told me that I needed to write this officer up. Now, in 30 years of the business, I can count on one hand the number of officers I wrote up, and this was one of those times. The sergeant convinced me that the CO was a danger to others, not just me, and I agreed. The CO was soon removed from his post and reassigned to an outside perimeter tower. The following information appeared in a 1989 incident report that I wrote up when one of my dining hall workers, Pingo Delgadillo from Stockton, did not show up for work one day. I paged him on the yard intercom, and when I got a yard visual of him walking out on the prison yard with another older convict, I again advised the central control gunner that Delgadillo needed to report to the C3 C4 dining area, but he just ignored my directives and went to the weight pile area with the other convict. Later, I learned that they had received two metal shanks from a black inmate, and as I maintained a visual, they both waited for yard recall to the housing units. And as three SUR 13 inmates were about to enter the Sallyport from the big side to the small side, known as Blood Alley, they ambushed the unsuspecting victims, stabbing them repeatedly, right in the blind spot underneath the main central yard gunner. I found out later that this hit had been ordered by NF Lieutenant Luis Rocha Roche from the San Fran Mission District, and the Norteños took control of the yard after that, but ended up losing it to the Bulldogs not long after. Again, I took my career very seriously and learned as much as I could whenever I could. A lot of officers were just content to sit in their offices or stand around the yard talking about personal issues and telling jokes. I was a proactive officer, doing spot searches to try and keep inmates on their toes with the intention of preventing contraband and learning as much as I could about them. When I was doing cell searches, I would look through their photo albums and took note of who they hung out with and any gang affiliations. I would often memorize inmates from the CDC identification cards and unit mugshots that were posted in the unit offices, often marked with their gang affiliation. When they were out on the yard, I would take note of their tattoos and ask them what their street gang moniker was. It may be strange to some people, but a lot of these convicts didn't actually know the real names of some of their fellow convicts and would often call them by their gang moniker. So I paid close attention to this also and took note of who was friend and who was foe. This helped me in gathering intelligence and a lot of times helped solving who was involved in certain incidents down the line. And I wrote what neighborhood they were from on a small paper tablet that I always kept in my shirt pocket. I also often followed up on this information and checked their C files, which contained confidential information about them. Occasionally, I taught gang classes in the evenings for staff recall meetings. And I took every gang class that was offered at Larkin Hall, which was the Folsom training room. And I was very good at dealing with gang members, given my personal background. Christmas Eve 1991, the Aryan Brotherhood and Mexican Mafia and A5 Violence Control Unit staged a protest. They were upset because the menu said coffee, and the kitchen gave us Kool-Aid to serve them. A.B. Shot Caller Cornfed Schneider was housed next door in a bedrock cell in A6, but sent word over to A5 that the guards could not go off the menu. Inmates in VCU were told that they needed to send a clear message to the guards. So they covered up their cell windows and doors with paper during count, which meant that we had to suit up for cell extractions because they were not visible in their cells. I was ordered to be part of our goon squad, and we did 21 cell extractions that day. The ABs at Cornfed's direction fought the hardest and got the worst of it. I thought that was the end of that, but wouldn't you know it, 1 week later, on New Year's Eve, the kitchen gave us Kool-Aid again when the menu said coffee. The inmates staged another protest. This time, just the Mexican Mafia was involved, as the AB were still too banged up and bruised from the week before to fight this time. And we only did 11 cell extractions that day. Yep, some weeks were just like that. I think I had a pretty good reputation at Folsom, and a lot of staff liked me, and most inmates respected me. But there were also a few staff, in particular in the gang unit, that I guess did not like me being so proactive. I guess in their eyes, they felt I was sticking my nose in their business. And there were also a few cons that I had issues with. For instance, there was one inmate who got on my last nerve. He was a Crip from LA, and none too bright either, and always getting into trouble out in the yard. Months later, when my next bid landed me on the small side of A Yard at SAG, I encountered him again, this time in the Violence Control Unit, A5, A Section, Cell 10. He was on meds, and at the time, unit staff would pass out medications, just as long as they were not hot psych meds, which had to be handed out by a nurse. After I opened up his tray slot, I took out his prescription and placed the bottle on the flap to retrieve a pill to give him, when he suddenly grabbed the whole bottle from inside of his cell. I ordered, "Hey man, put that back," but he refused to do so, and played games for about a half hour until the goon squad was ready to suit up and use force. It was only then that he finally gave the meds back to me. This made me look bad in front of other staff, and I recalled all the other times he was a real thorn in my side any time that I dealt with him. Next day during yard recall in the A5 cement yard, I made sure that he was the last one taken out to be sent back to his cell. As he went to get cuffed up, I started counseling him on his behavior from the previous day, and he started getting lippy again. His body language was aggressive, so I braced him up against the wall. A partner, who was cuffing up another inmate, came running over to back me up and gave him a knee shot. Seeing all this, the control unit gunner chambered a round into his HK rifle. The overwhelmed inmate said, "Oh, I see what time it is. I see what time." We escorted him back to his cell without any further issues, and he was moved out of the unit before I came back from my days off. I think the ADSEG sergeant must have caught wind of the incident, which I didn't write up as I should have. I felt very bad about it afterwards, because it possibly placed lives and careers in jeopardy. What if the gunner shot? What if other staff were hurt and or put under investigation for my actions? None of the other inmates stuck up for this guy. I guess he didn't have a very good reputation with them either. Some people might think, so what? He was just a POS inmate. But this was all beneath my character. The inmates were getting to me. I was losing my cool. I thought I might be turning into an officer I didn't ever want to become, a monster. It was at that time I decided it was probably time for a change of workplace scenery. After my next annual bid, I worked graveyard shift for a year in Central Control, which has a main function of tracking inmate counts for all facilities, and was located inside the New Folsom admin office building, far away from any inmates. During this time, I would check out more C-files and learn a lot of information about individuals involved in prison gangs. After that, I worked a yard gunner position in C4 building for about a year, and it was during that time, the only time, that I ever fired my weapon in a line of duty. I don't have enough time to get into that story, but it's included in my book. I was growing tired of the hostile work environment at Folsom and had what could probably be called combat fatigue. I also grew very homesick from my home state of Washington, where my mother, father, sister, brothers, and most of my extended family lived. I recall being very torn over what to do with my life and with my career, and how any changes would impact our family, my wife, and our 3 kids. I applied to and was accepted as a CO at the King County Jail in Seattle as I moved on to my next adventure. If you're interested, there are many more details about these stories and many others that I left out in my autobio, The Life and Times of Vato Loco. I'll come back soon for part 2 of New Folsom Prison. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.